In the summer of 1858, the city of gentlemen and empire builders bent over its own waste and wept. The Thames had turned to sewage under the sun, and the smell reached into Parliament itself. This was our survival, a hidden labyrinth of iron and clay that we dug into the dark earth beneath the river, and we built it so well that it still breathes for us more than a century later. The nightmare began long before that terrible June when the heat rose and the river died. London had swelled like a fever dream through the early decades of the 19th century, pulling souls from the fields and the factories into terraced houses that had no business holding so many beating hearts. By the middle of the century, more than 2 million people called this place home, and every one of them needed to empty their bowels somewhere. The cesspits beneath the houses overflowed into the streets. The night soil men came with their carts and their shovels, but there were never enough of them, and the filth went where water always goes, downhill into the Thames. The stench was not metaphorical, it was physical, visible, a yellow-brown fog that hung over the rookeries of St Giles and Seven Dials, where families of 8 or 10 lived in single rooms with no running water and a shared privy in the yard that emptied into a pit that was never quite deep enough. Cholera came in waves like a biblical punishment. In 1848, it killed more than 14,000 Londoners. In 1854, another 10,000 went into the ground. The bodies piled up in the graveyards until there was no room left to dig. We did not yet understand that disease travelled in water, that our own waste was poisoning the wells and the pumps from which we drank. Dr. John Snow had traced an outbreak in Soho to a single contaminated pump on Broad Street, but his findings were dismissed by the medical establishment, who clung to the miasma theory, the belief that disease came from bad air rather than bad water. The physicians spoke of moral decay, of the poor bringing sickness upon themselves through vice and indolence, and so we continued to pour our sewage into the same river from which we drew our drinking water. The Great Stink of 1858 was not just an inconvenience, it was a moment of reckoning. The heat that summer was relentless, and the Thames became a black soup of human waste that sat beneath the windows of Westminster like an accusation. Members of Parliament soaked the curtains in chloride of lime to mask the odour, but it came through the fabric anyway. They fled the chamber, these men of power and position, driven out by their own filth. Benjamin Disraeli himself could not bear to stay. The crisis forced their hand. Within 18 days of the stink reaching its peak, Parliament passed the Metropolis Local Management Amendment Act and gave one man the power and the money to save the city. That man was Joseph Bazalgette. He was not a politician. He was an engineer, a builder of things that lasted. Bazalgette had trained under the great engineers of the railway age, men who understood that industrial progress required infrastructure on a scale never before attempted. He understood something profound about cities and about time. He knew that London would grow, that the 2 million would become 3 and then 4, and that whatever he built must serve not just his own generation, but the ones to come. So he designed a system of such monumental ambition that his contemporaries thought him wasteful. 6 main intercepting sewers would run west to east across the city, gravity doing the work that machines could not sustain, carrying the waste away from the Thames and out to the marshes downriver. The northern sewers ran along the line of what would become the Victoria Embankment. The southern sewers cut beneath Brixton and Camberwell, following the natural slope of the land. 82 miles of main intercepting tunnels built to carry twice the volume that mathematical projections suggested London would ever need. Mathematics alone was staggering. Bazalgette calculated that each person produced approximately 80 gallons of waste per day when you included rainwater runoff and industrial effluent. Multiply that by 2 million and then double it for future growth, and you begin to understand the scale of flow these tunnels would need to handle. The gradient had to be precise, just enough fall to keep the sewage moving, but not so steep that it would erode the brickwork over time. 2 feet per mile in some sections, less in others where the terrain demanded it. Every junction, every curve, every access shaft had to be calculated and recalculated. The pride of it was in the engineering and in the labour. Bazalgette chose brick because brick lasts. 318 million of them were fired in kilns across the south of England and laid by hand in the dark beneath the streets. Portland cement bound them together, mixed fresh each day and troweled into place while it was still wet. The bricklayers worked in shifts around the clock, their oil lamps casting shadows on the curved walls as they built. The tunnels were egg-shaped, wider at the base than at the crown, designed so that even when the flow was low, the sewage would keep moving. No stagnation, no blockage, just the constant pull of gravity taking London's waste eastward toward the sea. The pumping stations rose like cathedrals to the god of sanitation. Abbey Mills in the east was a palace of ironwork and coloured brick, its octagonal towers rising above the marshes of West Ham like something from Constantinople. 8 massive pumps worked in concert, each one a marvel of Victorian engineering, with pistons the size of a man and flywheels that spun with a rhythm you could feel in your chest. Why build something so beautiful for such ugly work? Perhaps because the Victorians understood that engineering was not separate from art, that function and form were 2 sides of the same coin. Crossness to the south was equally magnificent, its 4-beam engines each capable of lifting 6 million gallons a day. The Prince of Wales himself attended the opening ceremony in 1865, descending into the engine house to witness the great beams rising and falling like the heartbeat of the city. The air of London changed, not overnight but gradually, season by season, year by year. The cholera epidemics that had scythed through the slums began to subside. After the system opened in the late 1860s, the death rate from waterborne disease fell by more than half. The Thames began to recover, fish returning to waters that had been dead for decades. The city could breathe again. But the cost was more than money. Bazalgette spent £6.5 million of public funds over 2 decades. Politicians demanded cuts and delays and modifications. They could not see the value in overbuilding, in making the pipes larger than immediate need dictated. Why did the tunnels need to be so large? Why use brick when cheaper materials were available? Why build pumping stations that looked like palaces when functional sheds would do the job? Bazalgette held firm. He knew that cities grow and that infrastructure built for today becomes inadequate tomorrow. His decision to double the projected capacity meant that the sewers he built in the 1860s were still adequate in the 1960s, a century later, when London's population had swollen to 8 million. The physical toll on the workers was brutal. Men died in the tunnels from cave-ins and from the diseases they inhaled in the fetid air. Hundreds of thousands of tons of earth were excavated by hand, loaded into carts, and hauled up to the surface. The river had to be narrowed in places to make room for the embankments that housed the sewers. The Victoria Embankment alone required 3 million cubic yards of earth fill and took 5 years to complete. Bazalgette himself drove the work with a relentless attention to detail that bordered on obsession. He inspected the sites personally, climbing down into the half-finished tunnels to check the brickwork and the gradients. He fought with contractors who tried to cut corners. The magnitude of the achievement only becomes clear when you consider what London would have become without it. The city was growing too fast, the old systems collapsing under the weight of modernity. Without Bazalgette's sewers, the Thames would have become a dead river. The cholera would have continued its harvests, and London might have choked on its own growth. Instead, the city became a model. Cities across the world looked to London and built their own systems based on Bazalgette's principles. The intercepting sewer became the standard for urban sanitation from New York to Melbourne. The legacy is beneath our feet, literally. The sewers still function, carrying waste from 9 million people through tunnels built when Victoria was on the throne. They are overloaded now, straining under demands their builder could not have imagined, but they work. When it rains hard, the system overflows into the Thames because even Bazalgette could not build for climate change and population densities he could not foresee. The Thames Tideway Tunnel, a new super sewer being built now, is essentially an admission that the Victorian system has finally reached its limits, but it took 150 years to get there. Walk through London and you walk on top of one of the great engineering achievements of the 19th century. The brick arches beneath your feet are perfect, the gradients calculated to the inch, the craftsmanship invisible but enduring. Most Londoners have no idea what runs beneath them. That is the genius of it. The system works because it is invisible. Bazalgette died in 1891, knighted for his service, honoured by the nation he had saved. He is buried in Wimbledon, but his real monument is under the pavement, running silent and dark from west to east, carrying the waste of millions toward the sea. We do not think about sewers because they work. That is the point. The Thames flows past, cleaner now than it has been in centuries, and tourists photograph the bridges and the skyline. But the real glory of London is not in the towers of glass and steel reaching for the sky. It is in the arches of brick beneath the soil, in the egg-shaped tunnels that saved us from ourselves. Bazalgette and his army of bricklayers built something that outlasted empire, outlasted war, outlasted every government that rose and fell above them.